So let's have a look at the Next.js key features and benefits. And whilst we go through them, it will also become clearer why I like to call Next.js a full stack framework as well. I would say the most important key feature Next.js adds is the built-in server-side rendering support. Now, in case it's not clear what server-side rendering means, server-side rendering is all about preparing the content of a page on the server instead of on the client. If you take a standard React application built with just React, then if you inspect the source code of a loaded React page, you will notice that the page is actually pretty empty right from the start. You only have a basic HTML skeleton there, and then some entry point, some div with an ID root typically, into which the React app is loaded and rendered. But all of that rendering is done by React, and since React is a client-side JavaScript library, all that rendering happens on the client. So in the browsers of your users, it's not happening on the server. And as a result, the actual HTML code, which is sent from the server to the client when a user visits your page, is pretty empty. Now, that is not necessarily a big problem. It depends on what you're building, but it can be a problem. Because, for example, if your page also fetches some data from a server that should be displayed, like a list of meetups as we're doing it here, then the user might initially see some loading state, a flickering page for a fraction of a second whilst the request is on its way fetching the data, because data fetching only begins once the JavaScript code executed on the client, and then we still have to wait for the response of that outgoing request. Simply because the page which we requested did not yet contain that data. Now again, that is not necessarily a problem, but of course it might not be the user experience you want to offer. Now it can also be a problem if search engine optimization matters to you. Now this does not matter for all pages. If you have an administration dashboard, which is only reached by logging in, then search engine optimization does not matter there because search engines will never see that dashboard. It's highly user-specific and you need to log in anyways. But if you have a public-facing page with a lot of content that should be found through search engines, then of course search engine optimization does matter. So for example here, where we got this list of meetups, we see those meetups as a user, but the search engine crawlers will actually only see that initially empty HTML page which we're getting from a server. So that content is not picked up by search engine crawlers, and that can be a problem. And that's where server-side rendering could help us. If that page would be pre-rendered on the server, if that data fetching somehow could be done on the server when a request hits that server, and then the finished page would be served to our users and to the search engine crawlers, then users would not have that flickering loading state, and search engines would see our page content. And that's the problem server-side rendering solves. It allows us to pre-render React pages, React components on a server. Now, React.js actually has built-in features that allow you to add server-side rendering, but it can be tricky to get that right, and it requires extra setup from your side. With Next.js, that becomes way easier because Next.js has built-in server-side rendering. It automatically pre-renders your pages. And that means that with Next.js, if you build a standard Next.js app without any extra setup from your side, if you visit such a page, it was pre-rendered on the server by default out of the box. And that means that it's great for search engine optimization because search engines see what our users see, and our users also have a better initial load experience because they don't have that initial flickering. If we inspect the source code of a Next.js page, so of a page in a Next.js app, then we see that there, it's not just an empty HTML skeleton, but instead all the content is already there in that HTML page which we got back from the server. Now it is worth noting that with Next.js, after this initial load, after this initial request, we still get a standard React app running in the browser, a standard single-page application even. Subsequent navigation actions by the user, so when the user then browses our page and navigates around, those actions are all handled by React in the browser to have this fast, interactive user experience which we typically want to offer with React, which was one of the reasons why you would use React typically. So we still get that, but for the initial load, we have that pre-rendered page. And that in the end means that client-side and server-side code is kind of blended together with Next.js. And of course, in this course, you are going to learn how things are blending together, how you can write code that runs on the server, and how you can write code that runs on the client. You are, of course, going to learn all about that. And this is therefore one of the major features that makes up Next.js, this built-in server-side rendering, which on its own probably would already be a strong benefit or a strong reason for why you might want to use Next.js for building your React projects instead of just React.js. But it's not the only key feature.